part 3 in my guide to mechanical raid teams, and you'll have to bear with me being a bit quiet. I've turned off the game audio to facilitate you still hearing me when I'm trying to keep my voice a bit low. Now, I've chosen Mortarion for this video because he is quite a different beast to Zarek and showcases a lot of different aspects to the team. And one of the major things that really affects this boss that doesn't really affect Zarek is the effects of random number generation, RNG. You see the flaming hexes. These flames can spread to adjacent bushes that can obstruct the movement of your characters. Also, because you're using summons, i.e. Scarabs and Skitarii. The Scarabs and Skitarii will deploy differently depending on whether there are flaming hexes near to them, because they don't like to spawn on flames. They see that as danger. So if you had Tan standing on this hex here that I've tapped, under normal conditions, if this tall grass wasn't on fire and I deployed a Skitarius with protector mode, it would spawn onto this hex here. However, because that tall grass is on fire, the Skitarius will instead, the first one will spawn here. So with flames spreading around randomly, potentially catching fire to an adjacent hex, which then sets fire to that hex back again, you can have all sorts of different effects here. And that means it's very important to understand exactly what's going on with your mechanical team and how to use it. You simply cannot just follow other people's replays by rote, because after a round or two, things may be going completely differently for you as they would be for them. That's exacerbated further by the fact that Alepht's Scarabs, you can't really control where they move, and you can't control when they decide to replicate, and where they'll move to when they replicate, if they move before they replicate, etc, etc. So you have to be confident in your ability to use a mechanical team if you want to take it to attack Mortarion. And this is a legendary 5 Mortarion, i.e. the toughest one you can face. And instantly, if you look at the armor stat, you can see a big problem. He has 2000 armor. Now if you look at Rose damage from his passive, i.e. where the mechanical team gets most of its damage from, he's doing around 2550 damage on average. So if you have them on the same ground, you're going to be relying on Rose pierce ratio on his passive attacks, which will be doing a maximum of around about 900 damage through armor if you don't crit, and if Mortarion doesn't block. If he blocks, you're basically doing no damage. So you really need to exploit the high ground when you're using Row against high-level Mortarions. You want to exploit it in general, obviously, but here more than ever it's an especially pressing issue. And the problem with this map is high ground is in very short supply, and although I said this map is very much affected by RNG, you can, at least in the first couple of rounds, predict what's going to happen, because the boss's behaviour is very predictable. Unlike, say, that of Magnus, you can rely on him to do the same thing every single time. It's just your summons, how they act, which will cause the boss to act differently on different runs. He doesn't actually have different behaviour in the same situation. He will always do the same thing in the same situation. So don't think of Mortarion as unpredictable. Think of your team as unpredictable, and think of yourself as having to adapt to that on the fly. Right. And because the first couple of rounds you can sort of predict what's going to go on because you don't have any summons running around, you can ensure that he will be drawn over to adjacent to a bit of high ground which you can then exploit by moving Ro onto and getting that extra high ground damage bonus. So with this setup, I will be doing that. And it's important to deploy the Spore Mine here. What I want in this situation is for Mortarion to move so that he is encompassing this area that I'm tapping on here. And one thing that is predictable about him is when he uses his Lantern ability, he will try to encompass as many units as he can with it. So if I have my character set up like this, if he moves here, say, and he casts it south, he can cast it in an area that is basically this, which encompasses two characters. You can cast it to the sides, but that won't really do much. So he'll come all the way down here, he'll cast it in this area because that encompasses 3 units of mine, which gives him the most coverage when it comes to hitting and suppressing my units with that ability. However, if I put the Spore Mine here, he doesn't like to move as far as possible. So if I put the Spore Mine here, he could move forward 2 spaces so that he's encompassing this area that I'm tapping on, and cast his ability, which would encompass this area, which would be covering the Spore Mine that I've put here, Aleph and Ro. And so he'd only move forward 2 spaces rather than 3 because he prefers to move a shorter distance and cast his ability to cover all 3 of them. So if I put the Spore Mine back here, that will pull him all the way over to this area because he needs to cast his Lantern so that it covers this hex, which is 3 hexes away from his very edge when he moves to this position. So we'll see that now. Now, another thing you can rely on is that unless you give him a massive target of opportunity, and I mean clustering, say, like 6 characters together so that he can plague wind and kill them all, he will basically invariably try to melee Eldryon, or any psych that you have on your team, but obviously you'll be using Eldryon. So I use this to my advantage here. I put Eldryon up on the high ground so that Mortarion melees him. And of course, if Mortarion melees him when he is on the high ground, someone who's on the high ground can melee Mortarion. Also, when I deploy the Scarabs in this round, which I'll get round to, the Scarabs are... This Scarab Swarm is within 4 hexes of the high ground. And that means that, because summons move first, if I didn't have a character on the high ground, in the next turn of mine, the Scarab would replicate and move up onto the high ground and block Ro from moving up there, which I don't want. So it's good to have the character on here both to draw Mortarion in and also to act as a placeholder until I can move Rowan into position. I've moved the Spore Mine here because if you consider the footprint of Mortarion, he's so big you can restrict his movement very easily. And now the only position he can move to where he can use his melee attack on Eldryon is here. You can't really see the 6 hexes, but if you just if you think of the edge of him being here, that's where he'll move to. And I've moved the Ro here so that he is in contact with Mortarion for this turn, and he will be at the start of the next turn, so he'll get plenty of hits in with his passive. Now again, to avoid clumping up my units too much, I have activated Tan with Actus's heal here. So Tan has spawned his Skitarii in, but now I will move him off over this way to attack again, And now, instead of spawning the Skitarius in a cluster, he instead spawned it out of the way. I didn't make a big sort of clump of units down here, so there was no kind of invitation for Mortarion to use his Plague Wind or his Reaping Scythe against them. So I have everything set up how I want now. So, first of all, this is very important as well, make sure that, so you need to move Ro around, but you also need to keep him healed up with Aleph. So make sure that before you move him anywhere, heal him with Aleph. Also, if you think Mortarion likes to attack clumps of characters and units with his area of effect abilities, so his Reaping Scythe and his Plague Wind. So one thing I generally like to do is to heal Ro with Aleph, then move Ro away from him, just to not clump them together and reduce the chances of them both being killed in an area of effect attack. So Ro is now healed up. I'll move Eldrion to get the proper Doom bonus. I'll move Ro to high ground. And now I'll start attacking with Tan and Actus after I've used his active, because I'm predicting in the next round I'll get lots of hits from mechanical summons, so it's a good time to use his active. Also, the fact that Eldrion is still alive and he won't be much longer is another reason for me to use his active now. Now, I took a bit of a chance here and it didn't pay off. So if you look at Mortarion, he has an area around here where he can cast a lantern that currently has 4 units in it, and I'll be placing a spore mine here to increase that count to 5. And in my next move I will be moving Tan here and attacking, which gives Mortarion a group of 5 units in this area here to cast his lantern on. So split choice for him whether he casts his lantern to the northeast or the southeast. And I was counting on him casting it to the southeast, and there are lots of reasons why I did this. In the next turn I was hoping to have a Skitarius up here, have these Skitarii still around here, have the lantern cast down here somewhere, then I would move Actus to the spot where Tan is currently standing. I'd have Tan here, activate his Conqueror mode, and then use Actus's active to activate all of these Skitarii, activate Tan, who would then make these 2 Skitarii shoot again to give me a lot of hits, to then trigger Ro's passive. And the reason this had to work this particular way is I need to leave these 3 hexes clear, which I couldn't really do any other way. Because if I have Tan standing here, I need to be able to set him off with Actus's active and then move him out of the way somewhere up here to make way for Mortarion to then move up and melee Eldrion, rather than using a heavily damaging area of effectability to kill a lot of my units. So all of that is to just say I wanted to get a lot of hits in and leave this area clear at the end of things in the next round to be able to do a lot of damage to Mortarion, and in the round after that allow him to melee Eldrion rather than do anything more destructive. And losing Eldrion is always a shame, but losing all of my mechanical summons and potentially Tan and Actus is a much worse situation. So you can see the setup I was going for here. So imagine Actus in this position, how many attacks he could trigger, and then after Tan has attacked after being triggered, he could move away from here up to here and clear a space for Morty to move into. But unfortunately for me, he decided to cast his ability to the northeast rather than the southeast, which significantly restricted the amount of extra hits I could get in this turn. So instead I just accepted the situation, got Aleph healed up because I can't attack with Aleph without her then dying from Mortarion's contamination aura. Kept Eldryon in the same position to make him keep Doom available on Mortarion for this round, but also make him available to hit in melee. Get another hit in with Roe from the high ground, just keep him on the high ground. And then with Actus, use his active to heal him up and also get a couple of attacks in from summons. And I spawned an extra Skitarii in here, just because I thought, you know, I'm going to get all my Skitarii killed here, so the extra attacks might come in handy in later rounds. I could only get one extra attack out of Conqueror mode anyway, so I might as well spawn an extra Skitarii. Now the last question is just where do I spawn my next spore mine, and I thought maybe in a later round I might be able to bait him into attacking this cluster of summons here, so I spawned the spore mine near to it as insurance for a later round, potentially. So now I need to heal Roe, and that leaves me in a bit of a predicament, because you can see I now have 5 units in this area, and that's a very strong invitation for Mortarion to use his Reaping Scythe against them. Now I was being a bit experimental here, so what I did was I spawned a Spore Mine here to give him 5 targets in this area to also potentially kill in one attack with his Reaping Scythe. And I was counting on him killing these rather than killing Roe, Aleph and these 3 swarms here. And I don't know whether that's like a 50-50 toss-up and I just got lucky, or if he just prefers to kill weaker targets with that ability. But anyway, at the end of this turn, Roe wasn't killed, which I was very happy with. If I was hedging my bets, I would do something differently, and I'll just go through the rest of this turn and then say what I would do differently. So here, because I knew that Mortarion would have a cluster of 5 targets that he could kill, I could safely spawn in 2 Skitarii here, because the maximum amount of targets he could kill in this little area, if I spawn 2 Skitarii, by using his Plague Wind is 2, and generally he'll prefer to take actions that kill the most targets in one go, unless he has a Psyker to hit, such as Eldryon. So having 4 units together here is not a dangerous proposition, and I'd rather spawn those 2 Skitarii in and get a couple of extra attacks in the next turn, as opposed to trying to use Conqueror mode here, making a cluster of units here and potentially getting them killed by him using an area of effect attack. So I'll spawn my 2 Skitarii in, get the attacks from Roe while he's still on the high ground. Now, as I said earlier, I could have done something with Roe here, and that is to move him to one of these low ground hexes here. That would decrease my damage against Morty in the next turn. However, it would ensure that in the next turn, Morty would not kill Aleph and Roe with his Reaping Scythe. Because if I moved Roe here, then there are only 4 targets for him to kill potentially with his Reaping Scythe, whereas here, once I put the Spore Mine in this position, I've got a nice cluster of 5 targets for him to kill, so he will go for these 5 targets in the next round, if I do that, but I didn't. I took a chance, and it went fine. And there was quite a bit of lag here, which I didn't enjoy. I was waiting for the hammer to fall on row, but it didn't. A lot of lag. Now it's the last turn, so I don't have to worry about positioning. I can just put Tan in an area where he has the access to the most summons to activate with his passive, and essentially just go ham on the boss for the last few attacks of the turn. And that was the end of my attack. So, just shy of 300k damage, not particularly great. However, I'm sure you could do a lot better than that with the Neurophrobe. However, I'm not building the Neurophrobe team just for the sake of doing a bit of extra damage on the boss. So, if you can use a pre-existing good team that you have to do a lot of damage, then you might as well at least try until you can build up a diamond-free team for, every single boss. You're going to have to make do with teams that aren't, optimal at all times. And I think I did an okay job of making good use of my mech team there, even if they aren't the best.